Hello. I'm here to talk to you this afternoon about a health problem, a hidden health problem embedded in the beautiful modern body of our daily lives. It's a health problem that affects every single one of us individually, and pretty much every organization or every institution that you find yourself working in. It doesn't discriminate. It runs from the political corridor of power to the school, to the business school, to the office. You could say that this health problem is somewhat endemic. You could say that this health problem is somewhat epidemic and that it affects us in Africa and in Asia, and it affects us in Europe, and it affects us in America. It affects us, spreads amongst us, connects us, because that's the problem I'm writing. I've written about and I'm describing. It is a problem of connectedness. I'm here to talk to you about connectedness and its discontents. Before I do that, I should just say, don't worry, I'm not anti-technology. Here's the clicker in my hand. Look at my social media feeds. I'm not even going to list the many myriad benefits and beauties of the modern connected networked world. But we are in trouble with it, are we not? And let's look at it in a health context, just to give you a comparative. Let's look at the three symptoms that I would say are most associated with this age of overload. And at the end, I'll track back to these as also three solutions. So we know, don't we, about the obesity epidemic. We know that there'll be about 20% of the world's population suffering from obesity by 2020, which is pretty staggering. But what about infobesity? What about the fact that we are drowning in knowledge and information? Perfectly good, you might say, that it's unfettered and unregulated, but there's a lot of it. It drowns us. We tune it out. We don't trust it. So where there is a physical obesity epidemic, there's a knowledge infobesity epidemic. What about cardiovascular disease, diseased arteries? Think of those blockages and bloats. What about our networks, our ordinary, everyday networks? There's a tangle, the social network, the database. Why does nobody call it a people base? There's too much of it, and we don't have a system around it. We hardly even admit there's a problem with it. So we have these excessive quantities of knowledge and networks, and whilst they're good, we're in a pickle about how to manage them. And they're set against a third health problem, which is exactly the opposite. It is a deficit. It's almost a starvation. And that, of course, like a vitamin or a mineral deficiency, depletes the body of reserves. And what is that deficit? Well, of course, we all know it. We all suffer from it. It is time. So I want us to have a vision and a formula for a successful connected society, and one that puts connectedness at its heart. And that's what I call social health. So let me give you just a little bit of context. We know that the human being has risen from the swamp to the skyscraper in a very short period of time, in an evolutionary nanosecond, 200,000 years, give or take. 6,000 years ago, we began civilization as we know it, with our stories, with our cooking, with our pots. We moved fast even then. But cut now to 150 years ago. This is the underground cables being laid in 1857 between Newfoundland and Ireland. Very old tech, gutta percha, encased in 1/12 of tar and 1/12 of beeswax. But all modern connected life was ushered in just 150 years ago, with mass transit, with mass communication. And in fact, the modern technological giants whose shoulders people like Elon Musk are standing on in Menlo Park were laid down there by guys like this guy, Thomas Edison, Thomas Alva Edison. This is him pictured with the phonograph, one of his many inventions. He was one of the first to beat the race with the electric light bulb, and of course he laid those underground cables just 150 years ago. Now let's fast forward to 25 years ago. In 1992, Time magazine named its Person of the Year, but it wasn't a person, it was a computer. The Person of the Year in 1992 was the computer, and of course in that time, in that nanosecond, we've all become entwined with, embedded with computers in such a way we can hardly, no pun intended, we can hardly process it. In fact, our daughter, Anushka, who's born a Generation Z child with the auspicious birth date of 01/01/01, said to me in that annoying way children do, "Mum, in your day," pause, "were there cars or just horses?" And I know what she means. It is so fast, this scale and speed. Let me be honest with you, does it feel healthy? Let's cut now to one single day, 1 year ago, when 1 billion people were connected at the same time on one social network, and it was 1/7 of the planet. Mark Zuckerberg said at the time, and I quote, "This is just the beginning of connecting the whole world." But I put it to you that there is a disconnect, a dissonance, a difficulty, a lack of functionality about the way the human has learned to adapt to this hyper-speedy world. There's a number that affects and connects every single person on the planet, and it isn't a Zuckerberg billion. It has been around as a number that connects us and arguably defines us since that early civilization, since the Sumerians first invented, of course, time along with the wheel. And it's a tiny number. It's 168. And that's the hours end to end in the week, which Mr. Musk is not going to stretch anytime soon. So here we have it. Scale, speed, tininess. And that, I would argue, causes one of the most common, obvious manifestations of health that we acknowledge as a problem, and we call it stress. Here in the UK, 10 million working days a year are lost and attributed to stress or its factors. The global market in drugs is rising so fast, it'll be a $60 billion industry by 2020, which incidentally is going to be the same point in time when the World Health Organization says there will be 50 billion connected devices. These microchips, the Moore's law that microprocessing capacity would double every 2 years, which began in the year I was born, 1964, it ran out last year. So again, we have got ourselves into a stressful situation, and the language of society reflects that. We talk about fissure, we talk about breakage, we talk about breakdown, and of course, we talk about computers having a virus. But for me, we now need to talk about the health problem and how to deal with it, rather than just the language. So I had my own health crisis 10 years ago when the iPhone came on the market. I'm sure there was a connection. 2 years after Facebook really became big in this country. And in fact, I still carry around a bunched tissue with me to remind me of the time, the nice, elegant little item, this bunched tissue, to remind me of the time I got very sick, and I paid no attention whatsoever to it, because I didn't feel I had the time. I was really busy. Our youngest child had just turned 2. I had lots of children, lots of stepchildren, a young business, a husband, you know, lots of people and things in my life needed maintenance. And I didn't have time to be ill, but I was stuffing more and more and more into my life. And we went on holiday. We went to a beautiful resort on the eastern coast of England called Aldborough. And I decided, crazily, because I'm not only not a runner, but I was considerably overweight, I decided to go for a jog on the beach. Don't ask me why. And I didn't get very far. I ground to a halt. I felt that the sand was rising up into me rather than me being on it. And I had pneumonia and sepsis, and I nearly died. And I realized I was like that beautiful Stevie Smith poem, not waving but drowning. I was much further out than you thought, and I wasn't waving, I was drowning. I think we all know that feeling, right? We all know that feeling of the sand timer, the egg timer running out, of there not being enough to do, of there being this enormous wall of pressure against us. And as I began to recover, I spent really the last 10 years trying to figure out, was this just about personal wellness? Was this issue just about personal wellness and well-being? Or was it, in fact, perhaps a bit more systemic? Was this lack of functionality, this dysfunction, this failure to manage and harness not only the shortage of time, but time deadlines, coupled with excessive, complicated network structures and knowledge? Was it affecting individuals, or what was it happening? And of course, it's systemic. Of course, it's not just individuals, it's all of us. And so I want to focus on what that means, because without understanding the problem, we can't really start to get to the solution. Of course, we do see it all around us, this systemic overconnectedness, and within it buried fundamental disconnections, tuning out. You know, I'm not dealing with that, says the organization with impossible deadlines. The security authorities that continue to delve into more and more and more and more data, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have time to piece the human intelligence jigsaws together in time to stop people. The banking systems that get overloaded by layering more and more computing systems and networks one on top of the other, and then the bank cards get frozen. We see it happening. But here's an example of where it really happened in a sort of terrible symmetry all together. The perils of human connectedness, of systemic connectedness, and of the connectedness that underpins everything, which is the connectedness of network science in biology and in the natural world. This, for some of you who know it, is the Ebola virus. This is the Ebola virus that resurfaced in 2014 in West Africa. In 1976, it had surfaced again in what was Zaire, but it was in a weak, unnetworked place. It fizzled out. But in 2014, that wasn't the case. What happened in 2014 is that some fruit bats were smoked out of a tree by children in a heavily networked region, even though it was small, called Gwekedu in in Guinea, in equatorial West Africa. And these children brought these bats to the elders in their village, and they ate them, and they began to die. And what then happened was initially just a purely story of biological and human spread. Humans spread love, and as people died, they caressed and touched and kissed the bodies to send them into the afterlife, which was the worst thing you could do because the maximum moment of contagion with that virus is death. But they also spread rumor, because when Médecins Sans Frontières came in, because the WHO was not in the game at that point, they were disconnected, they were slow. When those white suits came into the villages, rumor spread like wildfire that it was witchcraft, and they ran away. And when they ran, they spread the disease. But actually, it was the fatal political disconnect that bothered me most when I looked into this story. You had 6 African countries who between them lost 11,000 people in a year. Many of them were recently war-torn, and they didn't want to admit they had a problem, and they didn't want to deal with the problem in a real way because they wanted to carry on being open for business. So they did something politicians do sometimes, which is to kid themselves that if they counted different numbers, everything would be all right. So they decided not to count people who'd been exposed to it, and they only counted those people who were showing actual symptoms and dying. So it spread more. One connection was made that you needed disconnection to solve this problem. And that was made by the only African woman leader, President Eileen Sirleaf Johnson in Liberia. She took a difficult decision. She took the decision to quarantine people. It was a contentious decision. She combined it with a great connective device of humans, which is communication, massive public health, to go around to people to say, no, no, you haven't done anything wrong. It's not a police state. It's simply that we need to limit the physical hand-to-hand, hand-to-mouth, physical connectedness until this thing dies out. And that is where we need to start looking if we want to be more functional. I mean, maybe we don't. Maybe we want to continue careening headlong into this excess, starving ourselves of time and thinking someone somewhere is going to invent a way of speeding our time clock up and replicating it. But I don't think so. So I began to think about what success looked like. I'm in business too. What does success look like? And I started to look at the original definition of the World Health Organization of health itself, which surprisingly hasn't changed in 70 years. It still says, you can read it for yourself, that it is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of injury and disease. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that we are doing a lot about physical and mental well-being, and our definition of it hasn't really changed. Let's take a straw poll. Put your hand up if you've ever bought a vitamin. Put your hand up if you've ever bought a vitamin. Ever bought some apparel, some fitness apparel? Keep your hand up. Joined a gym. Counted a carb or a calorie. Right, me too. Meditated. So we're part of, wait for it, a $3.7 trillion business in wellness and fitness, which is more or less 70 years old. And as if that number wasn't pretty big, it's twice the size of the arms trade. Get that? It's really big. Now, what's interesting about that is two things. One is that a lot of that is about the way we show and share our wellness. You know, running clubs, cycling clubs, marathons, it's all social, it's all connected, and it's all very visible. And we have osmotically, culturally become infused with these messages and these behaviors. That's how behaviors changes through culture. But we haven't yet done it with social, because social then meant something very different. Social then meant poverty. So now we need a new fitness, a new definition. That's me, obviously, on the treadmill. You know, we need a new definition of fitness. And so this comes to, what does success look like? So now I want you to picture in your hands, maybe even close your eyes, I want you to picture a knot, like a piece of rope. Imagine you're on a boat, you've been given a little piece of rope, and you're just tying it in a knot. That knot is an acronym, K-N-O-T. And it's one cognitive trope that I believe individuals and organizations need to start to do to begin to practice the very behaviors and norms we do, whether it's with mindfulness, whether we do it with hydration, whether we do it with our diet. These are all tricks, these are all techniques, these are all devices. You could make them up. And the first in the knot, you can open your eyes now, is the knowledge dashboard. It's a way of dealing with that information. Obesity, very similar to the 5-a-day nutritional campaign, which frankly has no empirical scientific basis whatsoever. It's simply a way of getting the public, it was very successful, getting the public to accept it. So have 5 sources of information, don't have limited information. Then have a management system around your networks, even for 6 months. Most of you, I might suggest, have more organization in your sock drawer than you do in your networks. Your friends, your strangers, your colleagues, they're all mulched together probably on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Outlook, in all sorts of systems. And that is a problem because it's not the scale that really human beings operate at. Think 200 countries in the world, 168 hours in the week. Think intimate. Think face-to-face. in a Facebook world when it comes to managing your networks. And finally, time. Treat your calendar and your schedule like your body. Nobody puts anything in anybody's body unless they are disabled or a victim of a crime. We all control what goes into our bodies. We don't do that with our calendars and our schedules. Yes, I'll go to that meeting on the other end of the planet on Wednesday. Yes, yes, you can fill a daily meeting for me and a conference call. We need to own that very precious commodity of time. So the knot, everybody asks me for tips and solutions. I would love to carry on talking about the philosophy of it, but the knot is just one practical step in dealing with social health and patterns and behaviours just like we do our physical and our mental health. And I'm going to leave you with my favourite joke. It brings together, I hope, everything that I've been talking about. It certainly brings together Mr. Albert Edison, who was inventor of the light bulb. And it is simply this. How many psychoanalysts does it take to change a light bulb? One. But the light bulb has to really want to change. So I've done my talk, but now it's about action. Thank you.